Washington, D.C., 10 p.m. Jasmine Crockett, fresh from a high-profile political gala, freezes mid-step when she sees 13-year-old Maya, drenched and trembling, clutching a soggy cardboard sign no one dares to read. What begins with a gentle question, "Are you okay?" spirals into a gripping three-day fight to save a dying dog and protect the only thing Maya has left, hope. In a city of 700,000, two strangers collide, and one act of compassion could shake the entire system to its core. What will become of Maya and her dog when the world only watches from behind glass? Stay with us. This is a story worth every second of your time. Washington, D.C. didn't sleep. At 10 p.m., the Capitol pulsed with power beneath the marble shadows of its monuments. Black SUVs rolled past lit government buildings, engines humming like quiet threats. On the corner of Pennsylvania Avenue, a private dinner had just wrapped inside the Hamilton, a sanctuary for lobbyists, donors, and those who moved legislation with whispers and wine. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, clad in a slate-black suit that matched her reputation for sharp words and sharper instincts, stepped out beneath the gold-trimmed awning. Cameras had stopped flashing. Her driver opened the door. Then she froze. Just 6 feet away on the rain-slicked sidewalk sat a girl, small, soaked, and silent. Her frame curled inward, clutching a handwritten sign that was smudged beyond recognition. No one looked at her. Not one of the powerful guests who had just spoken about opportunity for all. They stepped over her like she was a stain on the street. Jasmine didn't move. The air shifted. There was something unbearable in the girl's posture. Not just cold or hunger, but resignation, like she'd already accepted the world had no use for her. A passing couple tightened their coats and sped up their steps. One man muttered, "Another one," as if homeless children were weeds on the Capitol lawn. Jasmine's heart pounded, but not from fear. It was rage. This city spent billions on optics, while this child sat invisible outside a building serving $300 steaks. And still, the girl didn't beg. She didn't even raise her eyes until Jasmine stepped closer. In that one glance, Jasmine saw everything: exhaustion, loss, defiance. It was the look of someone too young to give up but too battered to believe. She knelt slowly, ignoring her silk pants and the rain-soaked pavement. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice calm but firm, like a hand reaching into a fire, unsure if she'd pull out ash or a flicker of something still alive. And in that exact moment, surrounded by men in $1,000 suits and women wrapped in silk and influence, Jasmine Crockett, battle-hardened from the halls of Congress, chose not to move up the ladder of power, but to step down into the rain, into the silence, into the story no one else dared to notice. The girl didn't speak, not right away. Her shoulders trembled beneath her damp hoodie, not from cold, but from the weight of something she was clearly carrying alone. She glanced at Jasmine, then quickly looked away, as if ashamed to have been seen. The street behind them throbbed with life, headlights streaking past, snippets of laughter from drunk lobbyists down the block, a siren howling somewhere in the distance. But here, on this sliver of wet concrete, everything had slowed. Jasmine crouched lower, still meeting the girl's eye level, her breath rising in steady puffs against the night air. Finally, after an excruciating pause, the girl's lips parted. Her voice was paper-thin, dry and trembling. "I need help, but I can't say it out here." Her eyes weren't scared. They were calculating, watching, measuring. Not if Jasmine was safe, but whether the world she represented could be trusted with truth. Jasmine recognized that look. It was the same one she'd worn the night she stood up to a system that told her to sit down. This wasn't a child begging. This was someone resisting surrender. Without a word, Jasmine extended her hand. Not a politician's handshake, a gesture of quiet urgency, the kind you only offer when you know the next few minutes might matter for the rest of someone's life. The girl hesitated, then nodded faintly, took Jasmine's hand with a grip firmer than expected, and rose. They walked in silence past empty storefronts and flickering neon, the city towering over them like it didn't care who lived or died on its sidewalks. 3 blocks later, Jasmine pushed open the door to a corner diner. Low ceilings, scratched booths, the smell of burnt coffee and old secrets. The heater buzzed overhead like a broken promise, but it was warmer than outside. The waitress raised an eyebrow, but said nothing when Jasmine gestured for the back corner. They slid into a booth with cracked red vinyl seats. Jasmine removed her coat but kept her tone quiet and direct. "Let's start simple. What's your name?" The girl didn't answer. She just stared at the salt shaker, as if it might offer advice. Jasmine watched her carefully. This wasn't shyness. It was defense, like someone who'd told the truth before and been punished for it. The silence stretched. Finally, Jasmine softened her voice, not to coax, but to level the field. "You said you didn't run away to hide," she said. "You said you ran to save someone." The girl's fingers tightened around the edge of the table. She looked up. No more wavering. "Yeah," she said, "but he's not who you think." Jasmine leaned in, her voice barely above a breath. "Then tell me." The girl drew a slow inhale. Her voice didn't shake this time. "I ran to save my little brother," she said, and then paused. "But he's not human." Jasmine didn't flinch, but something deep inside her stilled. The girl's words weren't just a twist. They were a wound, freshly reopened. And Jasmine, who had faced senators, billionaires, and the brutality of televised hearings, suddenly found herself face to face with something far more disarming. Quiet, lived truth. The girl lowered her gaze, her fingers tracing invisible patterns on the vinyl table, as if trying to summon the courage to unearth something she had long buried beneath silence. "His name's Toby," she said, the syllables falling out like a secret too heavy to hold any longer. "He's my dog, my brother, my last anything." Jasmine didn't interrupt. She recognized the cadence, not just of grief, but of restraint. This wasn't a story the girl told often. It was one she had held tight, clutched to her chest like a photo you reread until the ink fades. "He came on my 7th birthday," the girl continued, "right after dinner. It was snowing a little outside, not much, just enough that everything looked silver." Her voice turned almost dreamlike, distant, like she was narrating someone else's life. "We'd just gotten home. My dad told me to open the front door, and there he was, shivering, wet, just waiting. This scrawny black and white puppy with the biggest ears I'd ever seen. My mom wrapped him in her coat and said, 'Looks like he picked you, birthday girl.'" She paused, eyes blinking hard but refusing to let tears fall. Jasmine could feel the weight in the air now, thick, like humidity before a thunderclap. "They called him a miracle, a sign. My mom believed in stuff like that, meant to be moments. Toby was one of them. He followed me everywhere, slept at my feet, nibbled on my shoelaces. He made the house loud and alive. He was family, not like family." "Family." Her voice turned low then, almost hollow, like someone peering down a well that never ends. 2 months later, everything changed. My parents were on their way to pick me up early from school. We were going to surprise my grandma for her birthday. I remember waiting by the front office with my backpack already zipped. Then I remember the principal walking in with a police officer. She wouldn't look at me when she said my name. A long silence. The truck hit them head on. Driver was drunk. No seatbelt. My mom died on impact. Dad made it to the hospital, but only for an hour. She didn't cry, but her hand clenched tightly around the spoon on the table, white-knuckled, the metal trembling softly against the edge of the saucer. Toby didn't understand, of course. He kept running to the front door, waiting, scratching at it every evening at the same time they used to come home. After a while, he just stopped eating, unless I sat beside him. He started sleeping in their closet, wouldn't bark, wouldn't move unless I moved. Jasmine felt her throat tighten. Her mind reached for words, but there were none that wouldn't sound hollow in the face of this kind of devastation. "I was sent to live with my uncle," the girl went on, her tone hardening like the shell she had clearly learned to wear. "He's my dad's older brother, always been angry, always said my dad was the weak one for marrying someone who worked with animals instead of someone who made money. When I showed up with Toby, he looked at me like I was carrying a dead rat, not a dog." Jasmine's pulse quickened. "He told me on day one, 'That mutt stays outside. You feed it, clean it, and don't come crying when it disappears.'" The girl's voice turned sharper now, less haunted, more defiant. I tried to keep quiet. I followed every rule. I stayed out of the house when he got drunk, which was most nights. I fed Toby with the scraps I could steal from the fridge. I made a bed for him in the shed using my old blankets. He was cold, but he stayed. The injustice in her tone now had weight, like bricks being laid one by one into a wall no child should have had to build. Every time Toby barked, even just once, my uncle would pound on my bedroom door and scream, "One more noise and he's gone." He started keeping a leash by the back door, not to walk Toby, to drag him to the pound. She swallowed hard, her expression tightening like she was bracing herself against another blow. And then 2 weeks ago, Toby stopped eating, like before. I knew something was wrong. He wasn't barking, wasn't walking right. He was shaking, dry heaving. I tried giving him rice, broth. Nothing worked. Then he started vomiting. Yellow stuff. Then blood. She finally looked up, straight into Jasmine's eyes, and her voice, though soft, was the strongest it had been all night. My mom used to be a vet tech. She always said, when an animal stops eating, pay attention. When they start throwing up and getting weak, it might be a blockage. Could be fatal. I remembered that. Jasmine leaned in, breath caught. I told my uncle, begged him to take us to a vet. You know what he said? The girl gave a dry laugh without any humor. It's a dog, not a child. Let it die. Problem solved. Her fingers trembled again, this time from suppressed rage, not fear. So I waited until he passed out, took Toby, took my backpack, and ran. She exhaled sharply as if saying it out loud confirmed that she really had crossed the line of no return. We slept under a bridge the first night. I had a towel from school and a bottle of water. I held Toby against my chest and tried to keep him warm. I thought I'd find a free clinic. I thought someone might help. But everywhere I went, they wanted money, paperwork, proof of ownership. I have none of that. Just memories. The weight of those final 2 words, just memories, landed hard. Jasmine didn't realize her own hands had curled into fists until her nails dug into her palm. She'd faced down CEOs who stole from veterans, judges who traded justice for favors, and lobbyists who lied through bleached smiles. But none of them, not one, had ever made her feel the kind of raw, helpless anger this child's story did. I wasn't running away from home, the girl said, her voice steel now. I was running towards something, towards saving something. I wasn't going to let him die on a concrete floor because some man couldn't be bothered to care. Jasmine didn't speak. Not yet. Words would come. But in that moment, there was only one truth. The world had failed this child over and over again. And somehow she still chose love, chose loyalty, chose to carry a fragile, dying creature across a city that had already abandoned her. And now she sat across from a woman who had once promised herself she'd never walk past injustice, even when the cameras weren't rolling. Especially then. Jasmine was already on her feet. Where is he now? She asked. The girl rose too, fast and focused. Not far, 5 blocks. I didn't know where else to take him. I found a dry spot behind a mechanic shop. I wrapped him in my hoodie, gave him the last of the water. They moved through the cold like shadows, Jasmine leading with long, determined strides, the girl guiding her with a child's desperate compass. The city didn't care. Its neon lights blinked indifferently. A bus whooshed by, showering them in a fine mist. Somewhere nearby, a man shouted into a phone. None of it mattered. Behind a dumpster, in the filth and forgotten corners of the nation's capital, lay a creature barely hanging on to breath. Toby. His frame was curled tightly, as if trying to disappear into himself. His ribs were visible through thinning fur. His eyes fluttered open and closed, slow and sluggish. A wet cough rattled his chest. Jasmine knelt slowly, setting her coat beneath him. She touched his side gently. It was hot, taut, and quivering. He's in crisis, she muttered. He won't last the night. The girl crouched beside her, arms wrapped around herself like armor against the cold and everything worse. I didn't know what else to do, she said, voice cracking for the first time. I tried. I fed him from my hand. I warmed him with my body. I couldn't let him die in that house. Jasmine reached out and pulled Toby into her arms like she would a wounded child. He didn't resist. He barely moved. His heartbeat was faint, erratic. "Get in the car," Jasmine said. "Now!" They drove like the city was chasing them. Jasmine's hands clenched the wheel at 10 and 2, eyes fixed ahead like a laser. The girl sat beside her, clutching Toby's body in the blanket, whispering his name with every bump in the road. "Stay with me, Toby. Stay!" Her voice was hoarse with hope and panic. "You're stronger than this. Just hang on." The veterinary emergency clinic loomed ahead, an aging building with a flickering sign and too much silence. Jasmine didn't wait for instructions. She kicked the car door open, marched into the lobby with Toby cradled like a newborn, and slammed her congressional ID down on the counter. "He needs surgery," she said, voice like steel. "Now!" The receptionist blinked in stunned silence. Jasmine didn't wait for her to respond. "This dog is dying. Internal obstruction, probable sepsis. And if you make us wait for intake paperwork or a deposit, I'll shut this entire place down by morning." The words weren't a threat. They were a verdict, a promise made from the depths of a woman who had built her career dismantling the machinery of neglect. Behind the desk, a vet tech rushed to the door. "Bring him!" she shouted toward the rear hallway. Two more techs appeared, rolling a gurney. Jasmine laid Toby gently across it. "Careful, his abdomen is rigid. He's slipping fast." They rushed the gurney down the corridor. The doors flung shut behind them. The girl stood motionless in the center of the lobby, arms still curved around the air where Toby had been just moments ago. "I don't know if I waited too long," she said quietly. Jasmine turned to her, placed a hand on her shoulder. Not soft, not coddling, but firm, resolute. "You didn't wait," she said. "You acted, when no one else would." The girl blinked, but she didn't speak. Her hand fell slowly to her side, fingers trembling like the last ember of a fire not quite gone out. They had handed over a life, not a file, not a case, but a living, dying fragment of love. And now, as the doors swung shut behind the veterinary team, the weight became unbearable. And when the vet finally returned, the look on his face told them everything. The clock had already started ticking. He walked out wearing gloves still streaked with iodine and urgency, his scrub top damp at the chest. There was no clipboard smile, no pause to soften the truth. "The dog's in bad shape," he said, voice flat but heavy. "There's a hard obstruction in his intestine. Feels like plastic or cloth. He hasn't passed anything in at least 48 hours, maybe longer. He's severely dehydrated. His body's starting to shut down." The girl stood like a statue, gripping the edge of the reception desk as if it were the last stable surface in a world tilting around her. "Is he going to die?" she asked, her voice barely audible, almost apologizing for the question. The vet exhaled slowly, but his words were brutal. "If we don't operate immediately, yes." Jasmine inhaled through her nose, slow and sharp, like preparing for battle. "Then operate," she said. "No question. No delay." The vet hesitated, looking between the girl and the woman whose presence suddenly felt like courtroom thunder. "The procedure's complicated," he said. "It requires anesthesia, a sterile team, overnight ICU. It's going to run into the thousands." Jasmine stepped forward, her voice rising, not in volume, but in force. "And?" The man blinked. "Well, most families. There's usually a payment discussion before." Jasmine cut him off with a single slicing sentence. "You're not going to let a child watch the last thing she loves bleed out over a billing form." The silence after that was nuclear. Even the receptionist, who had been typing something without purpose, froze mid-keystroke. "I'll cover the cost," Jasmine continued, her tone hard enough to crack marble. "Run the surgery. Bill me. I don't care what it takes. Save him." The girl's mouth fell open, but no words came out. Her hand hovered in the air, as if reaching for something she never believed existed. Intervention, mercy, hope. Jasmine didn't look at her. She didn't have to. Her focus was on the vet now, like a lawyer locking in on a judge. "That dog is family. That child is not disposable. And if you delay one more minute talking about numbers, I'll ensure your license is reviewed by morning." The vet didn't argue. He gave a single curt nod and turned sharply on his heel, calling out for prep, anesthesia, saline. The door swung open. The gurney rolled through, the curtain dropped behind it, and just like that, the fight for Toby's life had begun. The gurney disappeared through swinging doors, swallowing the fragile life they'd fought to protect. In its wake, only silence remained, until the girl sank into a plastic chair, her arms curled around the empty blanket, like it still held the heartbeat of someone she couldn't afford to lose. She didn't speak for a long time, just sat there, head bowed, staring at the floor like it might open and swallow her whole. But then, in a voice that barely cracked the hum of the fluorescent lights, she said, "My mom used to work in a place like this." Jasmine turned slightly, listening, not pressing, just present. The girl's hands tightened around the fabric in her lap. She wasn't a vet. She never had the money for school. But she was a tech. Night shifts, weekends, holidays. She knew how to calm animals with just her hands, like magic. Her throat hitched, but she kept going, her words rolling out like a dam finally breaking. She'd bring me along sometimes, quietly. I'd sit in the back, watch her clean wounds, hold dogs that were too scared to breathe. She used to whisper to them, said animals never pretend to hurt. They only pretend to be okay. That's why they need people who listen. She paused, her voice cracking on the next line. I keep thinking, if she were still here, Toby wouldn't be like this. I would have known what to do sooner. He wouldn't have suffered. Jasmine didn't interrupt. The girl's fist curled tighter. After she died, no one talked about her. Not my uncle. Not anyone. Like she'd been erased. I tried to remember what she taught me. I wrote it all down in a notebook. But I lost it when we left the house. I lost everything. Her chest heaved, but she refused to cry. I know I'm just a kid. I know no one's going to hand me anything. But I wanted to help. I wanted to save him. And I still might lose him anyway. Jasmine leaned forward, resting her elbows on her knees, eyes locked on the girl like nothing else existed in the world. You didn't lose her, she said. You carried her here, in your hands, in every decision you made when everyone else gave up. That's not failure. That's legacy. The girl looked up, and in her eyes was a kind of disbelief, hope twisted with fear. Jasmine's voice grew firmer. When I was your age, I didn't have much either. My mom cleaned offices at night. I used to sleep on the floor behind her mop cart because we couldn't afford a sitter. I wore the same shoes for 2 years, the same coat for 3. Kids made fun of me for how I smelled, for how I talked, for dreaming too loud. She took a breath, not to pause, but to steady the storm in her own chest. I told someone I wanted to be a lawyer. You know what they said? Girls like you don't win cases, you wait tables for the men who do. And when I said I wanted to be in Congress, they laughed like I'd told a joke that would never end. Jasmine leaned closer. Her voice didn't rise, but it deepened, sharpened, until each word struck like a gavel. But I didn't stop, because somewhere deep inside I knew that if I ever got power, I wouldn't use it to be above people. I'd use it to stand beside the ones who've been stepped over their entire lives. The girl stared at her. No more doubt, no more deflection, just silence carved with awe. I want to be a vet, she said suddenly, not whispered, declared. Like my mom, I want to help animals. I want to make it mean something. Her voice cracked again, but it didn't collapse. But I don't know if anyone will ever believe I can. Jasmine nodded slowly. You don't need everyone to believe, she said. You just need one person to start. She placed her hand gently over the girl's. And I do. The girl didn't answer. But the way she gripped Jasmine's hand, tightly, desperately, said everything she couldn't yet say out loud. The flicker of hope the girl had just begun to trust was snatched back into suspense as the doors burst open once more. This time, with the weight of life and death riding behind them. And Jasmine knew before the vet even spoke. Something had shifted. The vet's face told half the story before his words even landed. Sweat beaded near his temples, and the urgency in his stride was sharpened now, refined into clinical finality. He's crashing, he said. Dehydration, fever. His oxygen dropped twice while we stabilized him. The girl froze in her seat, her knuckles turning white against the armrest. He's barely strong enough for surgery, the vet continued. If we wait, he dies. But if we take him in now, there's a chance his heart won't make it past the incision. Jasmine stood, calm but electrified. You said chance, she said. The vet nodded. Yes, it's a razor's edge, and we need consent now. He held out the form like it was a weapon and a prayer in one. This waives our liability, he said. Surgery is high risk. He could arrest, bleed out. We won't have time to call you if that happens. Once he's under, it's all in the hands of the table. The girl looked up at Jasmine, her lips trembling but locked tight, like any sound would collapse her. Jasmine met the vet's eyes, and her voice, when it came, was as unwavering as steel being forged. Where do I sign? The clipboard hit the counter. The pen slid across without a word. Jasmine signed not with desperation, but with purpose. Her name etched across the paper like a final wall between the girl and another unbearable loss. As she handed it back, the girl reached out and took her hand, not with the fragility of a child, but the intensity of someone hanging off a ledge with no harness. Jasmine didn't flinch. She squeezed back. He's not going down without a fight, she said softly, not as comfort, but as command. The vet turned without another word and disappeared through the swinging metal doors, which closed behind him with a sound that felt too final, too loud. And then came the wait. Not the kind padded by music or distractions, but the raw, oxygenless kind. The girl sat beside Jasmine, shoulders folded inward, eyes fixed on nothing. Every breath sounded too loud, too fast. The room was still, but her world was spinning. The hands of the clock on the far wall moved like a slow-motion pendulum, ticking in sync with her heartbeat, and each tick was a countdown she couldn't stop. A cough echoed down the hallway. A nurse passed through, didn't make eye contact. Jasmine stared ahead, unmoving, every fiber in her body alert, but calm, like the eye of a storm that refused to break. No one spoke. There was nothing to say. There was only time, and the impossible weight of waiting for it to end. Time had twisted itself into something cruel, each second heavier than the last, until the doors finally creaked open again, and the vet stepped out. This time he wasn't carrying fear. He was carrying something rarer, fragile, trembling, hope. He pulled off his gloves one finger at a time, his eyes scanning the room until they found the girl and settled there. He's alive, he said, and the words hit like oxygen. We found a blockage, thread, some kind of plastic tie, maybe from a toy or a food wrapper. It was coiled around itself, cutting off everything. His intestines were bruised, inflamed. He was minutes away from rupture. The girl blinked, slowly, as if afraid her ears had deceived her. But he made it? She asked, her voice almost inaudible. The vet nodded. He's still with us, but he's very weak. We've got him on fluids, antibiotics. He'll be in pain when he wakes up. It'll be 2 weeks before he's stable enough to go anywhere. And even then, he'll need care. Constant, gentle, no stress, no trauma. If we give him that, he has a real chance. The girl lowered her face into her hands, not crying, just folding, like her body had finally run out of ways to carry the fear. Jasmine stood beside her, one hand resting gently on her back. But before she could speak, the girl's voice broke through the quiet like a blade through silk. I can't take him home. Her words weren't dramatic. They were resigned, final. My uncle. He'll say this proves I can't be trusted, that I'm reckless, that I wasted everyone's time. She looked up and her eyes had changed. The terror was deeper now. He'll say I've made Toby weak, that I've ruined him, and then he'll tell me to choose, him or me. And I can't do that. Jasmine knelt, slowly, deliberately, so she could look the girl in the eye, not from above, but beside. You won't have to, she said, and her voice carried no hesitation, only steel. You're not going back there. Not now, not ever. The girl's breath caught. But I don't have anywhere else. Jasmine shook her head. You didn't, she said. Until tonight. The girl blinked hard, shoulders trembling. You don't get it, she whispered. Nobody ever keeps me. They take me because someone makes them. Foster parents, caseworkers, teachers. I'm just part of their job. Her fists clenched. They always act like they care, but then they give up. They always do. Jasmine's jaw tightened. I'm not them. She said it with such force that even the air between them seemed to pause. You fought to save Toby when you had nothing. No money, no backup, not even a safe place to sleep. And now it's my turn to fight for you. Her voice softened just slightly, but not her resolve. You saved his life. That matters. You matter. I will find somewhere safe. Somewhere real. Not another room with locked cabinets and people who forget your name after a week. A place that sees you. All of you. The girl didn't speak. Her lip quivered, but she held it tight. And then slowly, so slowly, she reached for Jasmine's hand and squeezed it like a thread pulled taut between despair and something she didn't yet know how to believe in. Belonging. She had made a promise. And in Jasmine Crockett's world, promises weren't made to comfort. They were made to be delivered, even if the system fought her every inch of the way. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Jasmine stepped out into the hallway, her phone already in her hand like a drawn weapon. Her heels clicked against the linoleum floor with purpose, slicing through the sterile silence of the clinic like declarations in a courtroom. She didn't call a shelter. She didn't call child services. She called Ava Martinez, a woman who didn't blink at trauma, who didn't flinch from broken things. Ava ran a nonprofit in rural Maryland known as the Haven Line Project, a sanctuary for children with no one left and animals that had been thrown away twice over. Jasmine didn't waste time with greetings. She's 12, she said into the phone. Ran away to save her dog, slept in alleyways, watched him almost die in front of her, and she still walked into that clinic like a soldier. She doesn't need pity, she needs placement. Fast. There was silence on the other end. Jasmine knew Ava was already calculating personality, compatibility, crisis layers, grief density. Then her voice came low and unwavering. We've got one open home. It's not temporary. It's not a bed for the weak. It's the Pierces, Vietnam-era vet. Wife's a retired animal behaviorist. 10 acres, fenced, quiet. They lost their daughter 3 years ago and swore they'd never foster again until they started working with rescue animals. Jasmine's throat tightened. Would they take her? Another pause, then, if she's who you say she is, they'll open the gate tonight. Jasmine didn't thank her. She just said, send me the address. She returned to the waiting room like someone carrying classified orders from the front lines. The girl looked up, eyes wide, as if afraid the moment would vanish before it began. You were gone a long time, she said, trying to sound neutral, but her voice cracked halfway through. Jasmine knelt in front of her again, the way she had the night before, eye level, heart forward. There's a place, she said, not a shelter, a real home, a family with dogs, land, and quiet. They don't do charity, they do trust. They take in survivors. You and Toby would be the first kid-dog pair they've accepted in over a year. The girl blinked hard. Her breath caught. Will I have to explain everything again, she asked, voice trembling under the weight of 100 retraumas. Jasmine shook her head slowly. Number, they already know enough. And what they don't, they'll let you share on your time. No files, no labels, just healing. The girl's hand reached for Jasmine's jacket, clutching it without looking. And Toby? She whispered. Jasmine answered with the weight of a judge's gavel. Where you go, he goes. That's the rule now. The girl looked down, but not in shame. This time, it was disbelief unraveling into something more dangerous, something sacred, hope. The road that brought them here wasn't long in miles, but in meaning, it stretched for lifetimes. And as Jasmine pulled onto the gravel driveway, past open fields and barking joy, she glanced in the rearview mirror and saw it in the girl's eyes. Awe, laced with fear. The house rose ahead like a painting too gentle to be real. White siding kissed by the late afternoon sun, a wide porch with peeling railings that somehow made it feel even more lived in. A hammock swayed lazily between two trees. A wind chime rattled softly in the breeze. But what stole the girl's attention, what made her stiffen in her seat, were the dogs. 5 of them, maybe 6, scattered across the wide green yard. Not leashed, not chained, running, barking, tails high. They played like creatures who had forgotten cages ever existed. Jasmine stepped out first and opened the back door slowly, letting the moment breathe. "Take your time," she said gently, watching the girl's knuckles whiten around Toby's crate. The girl stepped out onto the gravel, each motion cautious, as if the ground might collapse if she moved too fast. Her eyes darted from the porch to the open field to the woman walking down the front steps. Mid-60s, sun-browned hands, hair in a loose braid. She didn't speak right away, just knelt beside the crate and peered through the mesh. "He's a fighter," the woman said softly, "but I imagine he had help." She looked up at the girl, who stood frozen like a soldier who couldn't drop her armor. Then a man appeared in the doorway, quiet, built like a retired Marine with gentle eyes. He nodded once, and even that felt like a welcome. The girl turned to Jasmine, her voice barely more than breath. "Is this really for me?" she asked, the words trembling with more than disbelief. They were laced with years of learned rejection. Jasmine didn't hesitate. She knelt beside her, looked her square in the eye. "Not everyone gets a second chance," she said, voice clear and unshakable. "But you didn't wait for one to fall into your lap. You fought for it. You bled for it. And now you've earned it." The girl blinked hard, her throat moving like she was trying to swallow a lifetime of doubt. She looked back at the porch, at the dogs, at the people who weren't reaching to fix her, just to receive her. Her grip on the crate loosened for the first time, and though she didn't say another word, she stepped forward. Some stories don't end with applause or headlines. They end quietly in moments no one else sees. 1 month later, Jasmine Crockett sat alone at her desk when one of those moments arrived, wrapped in a plain white envelope. It was late evening in her Capitol Hill office, the kind of late where even the janitors had gone home, and the only light came from a single desk lamp, casting soft gold across a pile of unresolved bills and unread memos. Jasmine sat unmoving, her back straight, eyes heavy from the day's political combat. But then, at the very top of her mail stack, she noticed something strange. An envelope, smaller than the rest, with her name handwritten in neat, hesitant strokes. There was no return address, just "To Ms. Crockett" in blue ink that looked like it had paused between each letter, as if unsure it belonged here. She opened it carefully as though the paper might tear more than its surface if rushed. Inside was a single photo, slightly curled at the edges. The image hit her like a slow-motion punch to the chest. It was the girl, standing in a barn lit by warm sunset, wearing a volunteer's vest 2 sizes too big, her name tag crooked but beaming. She was holding a water bowl, gently tilted toward a black and white dog lying on a hay bed beside her. Toby, now clearly gaining weight, his ears alert, eyes soft with the kind of trust that couldn't be faked. Behind them, wooden beams wrapped in string lights formed the shape of a heart. There was dirt on the girl's jeans, straw in her hair, but her smile was whole. Tucked behind the photo was a folded letter, handwritten in that same uncertain but determined hand. "Dear Ms. Crockett, I wasn't sure how to start this. I still don't. They say when someone saves your life, you never forget the sound of their voice. I don't remember all the words you said that night, but I remember how calm you were. Like even when I was breaking, you weren't. I didn't believe people like you stopped for people like me, but you did. You didn't walk by. You didn't tell me to call a number or go to a shelter. You sat down, you stayed, and because you stayed, I got to stay alive. I feed rescue dogs now. I wash cages, I write down meds. I've memorized every dog's name here, and I tell Toby about each one before bed like stories. I still want to be a vet, but now I know I can be one. Not because I'm special, but because I was seen. Thank you for seeing me, for fighting for me like I mattered. I do now. Love." Jasmine didn't move for a long time. The office buzzed faintly with the sound of a distant hallway light and the slow tick of a clock that felt too loud in the silence. She stared at the letter like it was a mirror into a life she thought had already hardened beyond feeling. Then wordlessly, she folded the page with deliberate care, like she was closing something sacred, not shutting it away. She reached to her left, opened the drawer second from the bottom, the one she never let staff touch, and placed the letter inside. Next to the only photo she kept from her own childhood, a faded picture of her mother in scrubs, arms outstretched, standing in front of a South Dallas community clinic with a dog curled at her feet. It was the last time Jasmine saw her mother smile before cancer took her in the same hospital she once volunteered in. That photo had lived alone in the drawer for years. Now it had company. Jasmine closed the drawer softly, not like hiding a secret, but like planting something. And in the quiet hum of that late office night, she didn't cry. She didn't speak. She just sat still, staring at the space where the envelope had been. Because sometimes the most radical act isn't standing up in Congress. Sometimes it's choosing, in the middle of a storm, to kneel beside a child and say, "I see you," and knowing one day that child might rise. That drawer clicked shut like a seal on a chapter Jasmine hadn't realized she needed. But the silence that followed wasn't empty. It echoed with something heavier than grief, quieter than victory, a reckoning. Jasmine stayed seated in the half-light of her office, elbows on her knees, hands clasped loosely, as if in prayer. Not the kind with saints or scripture, but the kind you whisper when you've seen too much to pretend anymore. The letter sat beside her, its creases still sharp. The photo burned in her mind like an afterimage. A girl, a dog, a life reborn not through grand gestures, but through something far more fragile: attention. The silence pressed in, but Jasmine didn't flinch. She had lived in silences like this before. Courtroom silences before a verdict. Hallway silences after a funeral. The silence of a child waiting for someone to come back who never would. But this one was different. This silence wasn't the absence of noise. It was the presence of truth. She leaned back, eyes tracing the ceiling as if the words might be written there. Then slowly she spoke. Not to anyone in the room, but to the space, the stillness, the memory. In a world where everybody's rushing to win, to post, to matter louder than the next, sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stop, she said quietly, her voice the rhythm of memory. Just stop and look and see someone. She stood and walked slowly to the window. Outside, D.C. glowed as it always did. Urgent, indifferent. The Capitol dome stood like a monument to ideals far removed from the streets, where children froze alone under broken streetlights. She pressed her palm against the cold glass. "I almost didn't," she murmured. "That night, I had a driver waiting, a dozen emails flashing red, a fundraiser to prepare for. And God knows I've walked by people before. People with signs, people with stories, people with eyes asking questions I didn't want to answer." Her reflection stared back at her, faint in the pain. Older now, sharper, but not harder, not tonight. "I used to think you needed a title to make change," she said. "Congresswoman, judge, director, as if justice only lived in marble rooms with microphones. But that night, it lived in the back of a diner booth, in the quiet cracking of a child's voice, in a decision to sit instead of walk away." Her breath fogged the window slightly, then cleared. "She didn't ask me for much, just space, a few minutes. And when I gave that, everything else unfolded, like the world had been holding its breath, waiting for someone to care long enough to exhale." Jasmine turned from the window, walked back to her desk, and touched the drawer again. Not to open it, just to anchor herself in the weight of what it now held. "She reminded me," she whispered, "of myself, or who I could have become if someone hadn't stopped for me when I was a kid with more anger than answers." There was a long pause as she sat back down, eyes unfocused now, drifting somewhere between past and present. "How many people," she asked, not aloud but not silently either, "have I walked past? How many lives were quietly asking for help? And I never looked twice." She closed her eyes and saw the girl again, hunched in the rain, arms wrapped around a soaked cardboard sign the night they met. She had looked like background, like tragedy too far gone to salvage, but she wasn't. She never was. "She was never invisible," Jasmine said, each word landing like a slow drumbeat. "We just trained ourselves not to see." She leaned back in her chair, exhaled deeply. Outside, a siren wailed and faded. The city kept moving. "How many moments like that do we miss?" she asked softly. voice lined with something between wonder and guilt. All because we're 5 minutes late, or afraid of discomfort, or convinced someone else will stop instead? She looked around the office. The framed legislation, the awards, the flags, all the symbols of impact. And yet tonight, none of them felt as heavy as a handwritten letter from a girl no one thought would survive the month. In a world that measures success by how far you climb, she said, her voice trembling slightly, maybe we ought to start measuring it by how often we kneel beside someone who's fallen. The room grew still again. She folded her hands, this time not in thought, but in reverence, for the story that had landed in her lap, not by strategy, but by serendipity, for the kind of change that doesn't come with headlines or speeches, the kind that changes one life, one night, one dog, one girl, and maybe, if the world's watching closely enough, one nation's sense of what matters. The clock ticked once more, and with it, a final question rose. Not for applause, not for approval, but for anyone willing to hear it echo. How many people do we walk past each day and miss the chance to do the only thing that ever truly changes the world? To stop. Jasmine leaned back in her chair, exhaling a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding since that night. A single question echoed in her mind, relentless as a heartbeat. What if I hadn't stopped? Not out of guilt, but clarity. What if she had climbed into the black SUV, pulled out of that parking lot, and let that girl become someone else's burden or no one's? The truth was brutal in its simplicity. No one else had stopped. Not the donors in suits. Not the waitstaff who glanced and turned away. Not the passing strangers too caught up in their timelines and to-do lists. They all kept moving, cloaked in the same armor Jasmine herself once wore. Urgency, distraction, detachment. The armor of survival in a city too fast to feel. But what if one of them had stopped? What if any of them had seen the girl as more than a silhouette in the rain? The world might never know how close it came to losing her. And Jasmine, who had stood her ground in courts and committees, felt a deeper truth settle in her gut. A truth sharper than any political betrayal. We don't fail because we can't help. We fail because we don't stop to notice who needs help in the first place. It wasn't the first time she'd seen suffering. Jasmine grew up watching her mother work double shifts as a hospital janitor, wiping floors beneath beds of people who never bothered to say thank you. Her mother never asked for recognition, but she asked her daughter one thing every night before Jasmine fell asleep. Did you pay attention today? Not just to what you want, but to who's hurting? Jasmine used to think it was a lesson in kindness. Now she knew. It was a warning, because pain doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers. It walks quietly. It sits at the edge of sidewalks holding soaked cardboard signs. It answers, "I'm fine," and when it's not. It dresses up as strength when it's really surrender. And if you're not looking, really looking, you'll miss it. Just like so many missed that girl. She remembered the girl's fingers wrapped around Toby's fur, as if letting go meant losing him forever. Remembered the way she sat at that diner, flinching at loud noises, scanning the room for exits like she'd had to memorize escape routes. That wasn't just trauma. That was survival. And Jasmine remembered what the girl said, almost too quietly to hear. "I didn't think people like you stop for people like me." That sentence shattered her more than any courtroom defeat ever had. It made Jasmine question everything, her campaigns, her slogans, her speeches. She had always fought for justice, but maybe she had forgotten the smallest battlefield, the sidewalk. Maybe she had been so focused on systemic change that she'd forgotten personal intervention was its root. One girl, one dog, one decision. That was the lesson, and it didn't end at that diner, or the vet, or the photo in the envelope. It followed Jasmine into every room now. It whispered at every committee hearing. It pulsed behind every headline. Every time she heard a colleague refer to the homeless problem or kids in the system, she didn't hear statistics anymore. She saw her. She saw the night someone almost walked past the story that changed everything. The injustice, Jasmine realized, was never just the cruelty people inflicted. It was the ease with which others watched and moved on, the indifference, the polite avoidance, the ability to look suffering in the face and call it not my business. But it was her business. It was everyone's business. Because in a world this interconnected, there's no such thing as someone else's problem. There's only what we choose to notice and what we pretend not to. Jasmine's hands curled around the letter again. It smelled faintly of dog fur and lemon soap. She wondered how long the girl had stared at the blank page before finding the courage to write. She wondered what it took for someone who had been discarded to believe their words mattered. And she thought of Toby, the dog who refused to eat unless someone sat beside him, who waited at the door long after his people were gone, who bore his own kind of grief, silent and sacred. It made her wonder, how many Tobys were out there now? How many kids clutching leashes to memories, trying to protect what little they had left? More than she could count. More than anyone wanted to admit. But numbers didn't matter. Moments did. Jasmine stood up slowly, placing the photo and letter gently into the top drawer of her desk, next to the only other item she kept there. A faded photo of her mother, smiling in scrubs outside the hospital, holding a lunchbox in one hand and a stack of patient charts in the other. That woman taught her to listen, to slow down, to see. And tonight, Jasmine made herself a new promise. Not political, not performative, a personal one. Never walk past again. She walked to the window, cracked it open, and let the cold air bite. It reminded her of that night, the slick street, the trembling girl, the silence heavy with unsaid things. She thought about how close that story had come to ending differently. And then, for the first time in a long time, Jasmine Crockett cried. Not because she was sad, but because she finally understood the most terrifying truth of all. We are the answer to each other's pain. No law, no government, just us, stopping, asking, staying. And in that truth, sharp, inconvenient, and beautiful, Jasmine found her clearest mission yet, to fight not just for the unheard, but for the unseen. Because sometimes the greatest revolution is simply refusing to keep walking. She stands at the window with the city glittering beneath her, like a constellation of unfinished stories. And in the humming quiet, Jasmine Crockett feels the letter's weight convert into fuel, realizing that the line between ordinary routine and extraordinary rescue is only ever a heartbeat long, which means every person who hurries past suffering is choosing, consciously or not, to let a life unravel. So in this lingering breath, she resolves to turn memory into marching orders for anyone who will listen. We live in an age where convenience is a narcotic, where algorithms curate our compassion and headlines speed date our outrage, where a child can shiver on a curb outside a five-star restaurant while million-dollar cars glide by on silent electric engines, where a veteran panhandles beneath a 20-story ad for luxury condos, where a dog's cries echo behind a boarded garage as crates of fresh groceries roll past. And the true obscenity isn't poverty or pain, but the practiced indifference we polish into normalcy every single day. So hear this. The revolution begins not with podiums or polls, but with presence. Because stopping for one frightened girl and her dying dog carved a fault line through the inertia of an entire metropolis. Jasmine's simple question, "Are you okay?" became a battering ram against centuries of "not my problem," proving a brief pause can swing wider doors than any speech delivered to a room already convinced. Imagine right now the unseen theater of desperation unfolding beyond the glow of your phone. A runaway teen counting coins beneath a flickering lamppost. A trafficked child staring through a motel window at people who might be heroes if they only noticed. A battered woman rehearsing excuses while she hides bruises in a public restroom. An immigrant day laborer collapsing from heat beside the highway. A stray with ribs like xylophone bars chasing after a car that will never stop. Each scene waiting for a single witness bold enough to trespass against indifference. You do not need a badge, a budget line, or a blue-check profile to intervene. You need only the audacity to let compassion disrupt your schedule. Because every hierarchy that excuses apathy, class, race, politics, fatigue, crumbles the moment one person refuses to treat another human life as background scenery, And if Jasmine could leverage a rain-soaked moment into a lifetime of possibility for a stranger, then the rest of us have no defense for our silence. Think of the arithmetic of avoidance. Every time you ignore a trembling hand, the cost compounds. Emergency rooms overflow, shelters buckle, prisons swell, headlines harden, innocence curdles into violence. Democracy erodes one unseen citizen at a time until the bill comes due in blood, and we wonder how the nightmare started when the answer was stitched into the small choices we justified as too busy. So the mandate is disarmingly simple. Pause, look, ask, stay. Let your feet halt instead of hurry. Let your eyes meet the ones society teaches you to avoid. Let your voice become a bridge rather than a barrier. And if fear whispers, you'll be dragged into chaos. Remember that chaos is already here, stalking the ignored corners of every city, and the only antidote is deliberate, inconvenient kindness. Because when you stop, you ignite a chain reaction. The girl survives, the dog heals, the foster family discovers purpose, the nonprofit gains momentum, lawmakers glimpse humanity beyond statistics, a neighborhood witnesses redemption in real time, and somewhere down that line, another passerby decides they too will intervene, turning a single act into a widening current powerful enough to erode the bedrock of systemic neglect. Let this be your directive. Volunteer at the overcrowded clinic, mentor the kid nobody picks for teams, donate before disaster strikes, call out cruelty even when it ruins dinner conversation, vote like every box on the ballot hides a life in the margins, amplify stories that won't trend without you, build workplaces where people are valued more than profit, and above all, cultivate the reflex to stop and keep stopping until stopping is no longer radical but ordinary. So the next time the world blurs by in a rush of deadlines, earbuds, and glowing screens, remember the girl who found a future because one stranger refused to walk past. Ask yourself how many miracles are stranded on the shoulder of your daily commute, and choose to be the interruption, the inconvenient witness, the necessary pause, because history isn't written only by great speeches and towering laws, but by every quiet soul who decides, at whatever personal cost, that no life will disappear into the dark unchallenged on their watch. Resolve alone is a silent oath. Action is the roar that makes it real. Jasmine knows the roar must come from all of us, so hear this, and let it punch through your chest like a starter's pistol. Imagine a single downtown sidewalk at dawn, commuters speed walking past a boy, cradling a shivering dog beneath a flickering street lamp. In that instant, you decide comfort can wait. You crouch, you ask, you listen, and the world's axis shifts because you refuse to treat a living crisis as scenery. Cruelty's favorite weapon is convenience. We scroll tragedies, mute sirens, step over cardboard pleas, then excuse ourselves with busyness while injustice fattens on our hurry. Yet every overlooked life is a deferred catastrophe that will boomerang as crowded ERs, colder prisons, angrier streets. Revolutions are seeded by people who interrupt this cycle, who convert empathy into logistics, buying a meal, calling a clinic, rallying strangers in a waiting room, hammering city council inboxes until policy budgets human worth. Do not underestimate the contagion of one pause. A nurse waives an intake fee after you speak up. A bystander volunteers to drive. A reporter live streams the moment. Donations flood. A counselor drafts a no-kill ordinance. And suddenly the sidewalk where you stopped becomes the epicenter of a widening moral quake. Expect ridicule, bleeding heart, virtue signaler, soft. But remember, cynicism is the anthem of comfortable bystanders, and your defiance is proof their anthem is dying. Carry the memory of a dog's fading pulse and a girl's shaking voice as armor against their derision. Translate outrage into habit. Schedule a monthly clinic shift, budget a standing donation, keep care kits in your trunk. Practice eye contact with the invisible. Teach your children that mind your business is sometimes the cruelest phrase in English. If you command resources, weaponize them. Fund scholarships that tether foster kids to futures. Underwrite mobile vet vans. Push companies to audit pay gaps. Remind legislators that budgets are moral manifestos. If you hold only stamina and sincerity, Wield them like a crowbar, pry open conversations, break the locks of apathy, sit beside pain until it trusts relief. A sandwich offered with dignity can reroute a stranger's trajectory more decisively than 1,000 retweets. Let discomfort be your compass, compassion your fuel, imagination your map. Envision cities where bus stop ads match volunteers to real-time needs, where zoning laws bake kindness into blueprints, where school graduations require a year of service so that knowledge and empathy graduate together. You are the hinge between indifference and intervention, the thin red thread keeping another life from unraveling. And history will not remember how many errands you ran on schedule. It will echo with the names that breathe easier, because you were late for something unimportant, but right on time to change everything. Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.